recording.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all. It's been a very long time. Glad to see you guys are doing well.
Thank
Um,
you. You as well. I'm
You as
pretty
well.
excited for this presentation here.
so am I. I'm
Yeah,
glad we could
we'll
gather
start there.
tonight to present our presentation of Group 9. Why don't we get right into it? Not waste any time. Today, we embark on a fascinating journey through time, exploring the fascinating history of ancient civilizations and their profound contributions to the field of astronomy. As we delve into the mysteries of the cosmos, we'll shine a light on four remarkable cultures: the Mayans, Egyptians, Babylonians, and Greeks, each weaving their unique narratives into the celestial canvas. First, we'll start with the Egyptians, and that'll be me. The Egyptians had a fascinating culture generally, and as regards to astronomy, it was a very interesting culture of astronomy. Their myth, their sort of founding astronomical myth was this idea of a mother and father god, a sky and earth god, this sort of duality of the sexes represented in the cosmos. We had Nut, the goddess of the sky, and Geb, the god of the earth. What's interesting is it's an inversion of the traditional mother earth, father sky, or male sky, female earth. They believed that Nut was sort of stretched out over Geb in kind of a sexual position, and that the sun and the moon traversed across or through her body at night, and that she gave birth to them in the morning, and sort of in this repetitive cycle, day in and day out. That's what they believed was going on above. They had very interesting methods of doing a primitive form of astronomy. They used early sundials, and the famous shapes of obelisks we now associate with Egypt were often used as sundials, as well as commemorative markers, and displays of state power. They also used what the Greeks would later call a clepsydras, or a water clock. This was a primitive method of telling time in the day, where two jugs, one filled with water and one empty, were used, and the water was drained from one into the other, and was used to count time. An interesting one that was that like originated in Egypt and has been found in sort of in various other forms in other cultures was this thing called the merket, which is, we can see on the right, was this sort of this two-person tool and technique for measuring stars, wherein stars could be tracked throughout the year, and this was used to tell time, and also to tell time throughout the year. They broke down their years into something called decans or decans. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, which were 36 10-day increments, where they used stars in the night sky, and as the Earth shifted around the sun, the relative position of the stars in the sky would shift along with it, and it would shift in this predictable pattern. And so They used these merquettes to track the position of those 36 decans in the sky, and in so doing tracked their progression through the year. As such, they had a 360-day calendar, but they added in 5 days, these 5 special days, and so they were well aware, even 4,000 years ago, that the Earth had a 365-day calendar, as we see here above. The other discoveries, the famous pyramids of Giza, which I'm sure everybody associates Egypt with more than anything, are actually a miracle not only of ancient engineering and architecture, but also of astronomy. These pyramids are aligned on the cardinal axes to an incredibly accurate degree. And they're also aligned on the axis of the rising midwinter sun. So we see a theme here of alignment with the cosmos. There's been theories that the pyramids of Giza possibly represent the belt of Orion, although it's been greatly disputed in recent years in the astronomical circles. And finally, the Egyptians also discovered the existence of variable stars. That stars could have varying intensities. So that was it for the Egyptians. We're now going to move on to the Babylonian myth with Anna.
Hello, everybody. So my presentation, I broke down in 3 topics, which is the monumental achievements, myths, and methods. So Babylon was located about 15 miles south of modern Baghdad in Iraq. It was an ancient city with a history of settlement dating back to the 3rd millennium before Christ. The greatest period in the city history was in the 6th century before Christ, during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, when the city was the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. We have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon that were built by the king Nebuchadnezzar II. It was one of the 7 wonders on the ancient world. Also, the Ishtar Gate, which you can see is almost entirely blue, is a prime example of the art and architecture of the Neo-Babylonian era. It was constructed in 575 before Christ, also during the reign of the king Nebuchadnezzar II. The Ishtar Gate was the 8th gate to the city and also the main entrance. And also the name, as it's suggested, it was dedicated to Ishtar, which is the goddess of fertility, war, and love. Also, which I think is not on the slide, but in both 164 before Christ and 87 before Christ, the Babylonians, they recorded the apparition of a comet. And researchers later on, they have been able to use the astronomical data about the path and timing, and they confirmed that they were both comet Halley. Those Babylonian records, they are now in the British Museum in London. About the myths, the Enuma Elish is the Babylonian creation myth. It tells us the story of the god Marduk's victory over the forces of chaos and his establishment of order at the creation of the world. The story, it tells about the birth it tells us about the birth of the gods and the creation of the universe and human beings. Um, it tells us that in the beginning there was only undifferentiated water swirling in chaos, and out of this world the water is divided into sweet fresh water, known as the god Apsu, and salty bitter water, the goddess Tiamat. So once they were differentiated, the union of these two entities gave birth to the younger gods and later on to humans. So that's it for myths and methods. We're not really sure why the Babylonians were so interested in the motion of Jupiter. But one possible explanation is that Jupiter was associated with Marduk, and which was the supreme god of Babylon. So astronomy had a huge importance on Babylonian culture, in which they developed new empirical approach to science. And ancient Babylonian astronomers, they were the first to use a modern method to track the path of Jupiter. They plotted a 60-day portion of Jupiter's path across the sky on a graph, with the time plotted on one axis and the velocity on the other axis. They calculated the distance. So the final figure looked like a trapezoid, and the area under that curvature is the total distance that Jupiter traveled in 60 days. So that's pretty awesome. And that's it for the Babylonians.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. So I decided to pick the Maya because it's closer to my culture back home in Texas. I'm a part Native American, so naturally I figured this would be a fun project to do. So let's get started. So Maya mythology. So according to some of the research that I was doing, was they believe that the Mayans and the people of their area emerged from maize or corn. And with this, they felt that they were not worthy. So they built other beings who were worthy of worship. And one thing I found really cool about the Mayan mythology is how many gods they have. Like if you see here where I say Ipuk, one of several death gods, I think they had like seven of them. And there's like so many different ways that they celebrated these gods. My personal favorite was Bulak Shapan, the god of war. He represents Venus. This culture completely immersed themselves in astronomy. They used Venus with pretty much every part of their lives. They looked to Venus as to when to sacrifice people, when to plant their crops, and when to go to war. As you can see, the creator god is Adzama. So, like I said, with the corn, he's the one who created everybody. And like I said, astronomy dominated their culture. So let's go to the next one. So methods of the Maya. This one was kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what to use when you think of tools for astronomy. As you can see here, the observations were made by the naked eye with 99% accuracy. What they would do is they would build a sky temple and they would measure where Venus would be at all times throughout the year. And as you can see, with 99% accuracy with the naked eye is incredible. They relished in Star Wars related uh, wars. Like I said earlier, when Venus was at a certain point in the sky, it meant that different clans were meant to go to war and conquer each other. They also were able to have accurate predictions of eclipses. And one thing I found really cool was they have something called the Snake Temple. And two times during the year, when the sun hits just the right spot, you can see a shadow cast over the temple to where it looks like a serpent's tail at the end of the serpent head. And honestly, it's a really fascinating culture to immerse yourself in, and I would highly recommend it. Let me get to the next one now, please. So right here on the right side is the Mayan Observatory. As you can see, most of it is still intact. There's a couple windows that are still there, but a lot of it did kind of, dissipate throughout time. One thing that was very monumental for them is they created a 52-year calendar. So by the time that calendar would run out of time, the Mayan people would basically be in a panic because it was a time of great despair. Because every 52 years, they believed that their God would end their society. So after creating the calendar round, they decided to create the calendar long. So as you can see, it's 5,125.36 years. And if you remember in 2012, when people were freaking out about the world ending, it was because this calendar had finally come to an end. So, I mean, that's about it. I just thought it was really cool. It was fun. It was a very fun civilization to get involved with. And I highly recommend other people look into it.
So that leaves me to deal with the Greeks. I'll just
Yes,
say,
sir.
it's clear did that I chose them because I'm a classics major, so it does interest me and it's something I want to know and have internalized. Before this picture on the slide is a bit confusing, but I'll explain the top three words: mythology, astrology, and astronomy, and then I'll try to make sense of what you see here, because then it'll play into the way I hear at the rest of understand the rest of the Greeks' relationship between their mythology and their science and the religion and science and that whole debate. So essentially, mythology is the stories. Astrology is not the certain way people today use astrology. It is the stories that the positions and the images that you can make in the star constellations sort of tell. And astronomy is the sort of astro is Greek for star, as you probably guessed, and logos basically means stories. So it's the stories that you tell about the stars, nomos, law, or also placement in this case. So that's the difference between those words. And it is this sort of this connection that I hope to sort of explain as I make this presentation. So this picture and the way I'm about to explain Greek mythology basically, and here source matters, is essentially Homer's Iliad from the 12th to 13th century BC and Hesiod's Theogony from 730 to 700 BCE. It matters only because this is sort of when these things got written out, but obviously they existed before as oral tradition. The main gods I want to highlight, of course, there's many, is the primal beings, the prothogenoi, which are Chronos and Nake. I read it in Greek because there's a difference between Chronos, meaning like time, and then Chronos, who comes later. There's all these gods. The main one, Chaos, Aether, Erebos, all like sort of these mystical before, sort of ethereal and kind of hard to concretize gods. But the main one is, let's say, Chronos and Anagke, which basically means time and necessity, meaning to say like this process of creation is somewhat inevitable. What basically matters is you have Gaia, and this is the myth, but it sort of forms the basis of what their view of astronomy will be later on, even as they sort of change it. Basically, we have Gaia, who is in the middle, and she has sex basically with three beings. Uranos of the sky, and they produce the Titans, and then also they produce the Titans, and the Titans produce the gods, essentially. The Titans, Kronos and Rhea, who produce the Olympian gods we all know and love, Zeus and Hera and Hades and Poseidon and all of them. And also Atlas, who is interesting because he's the god of astronomy and also the god of navigation. Astronomy was important to the Greeks both because their location, their naval culture, the navigating, using the stars, having the stars tell these stories is super important to them. And then also Gaia, human beings themselves come directly from Gaia without really any father. And then there's, of course, Pentos, Okeanos, Thalassa. They're all sort of the ocean itself and not Poseidon, who comes later to rule the ocean. So the Titans make the suns. I could go on for a long time, but I'll just say that, for example, one of the Titans named Hyperion marries Thea, and they have Helios, Selene, and Eros, the dawn, the moon, and all of these things are beyond the earth, and yet and obviously the Greeks later learn and realize that the Earth rotates, or some people suggest, Aristarchus, for example, that the Earth actually rotates around the sun. But for their starting myth, for their starting understanding, is basically this. I'll take the, but again, they never take. It seems that they never take it as literally as, let's say, other believers of the Abrahamic faiths take what they think is a direct cosmology. The last thing I'll say is that there are also other gods, which are like Hades and Tartarus and Hypnos and Thanatos, which are gods, but they don't roll over anything physical. There's some ways more religious. There are ideas about like notions of death and time and burial and sleep. But that is conversation for another time. Next slide, please. So it has to be said that the Greeks would not have anything without the building of the civilizations which came before, which we've discussed, the Egyptians and the Babylonians. Their main impact is invention and extensive use of astronomy and trigonometry to solve their problems. Essentially, in the first pick, they're like estimations of versatility. This is the main timeline. Basically, in the 5th century BCE, Anaxagoras argues for spherical Earth. He explains this based on his view of eclipses, and also the fact that when you see ships coming on the horizon, they sort of come up, they don't appear all at once. And so that's his proof, for which he is not chastised or cast out as a heretic, but perfectly accepted, even though it contravenes previous notions of their own theology. In 400 BCE, Exodus of Cnidus wrote a treatise which doesn't really exist anymore, called The Theory on the Movement of Planets. And it's sort of picks 1 and 2, which is about the idea that like the heaviest things in the middle and the lighter things are on the outside, and that's how they sort of rotate around. In 350, Aristotle wrote On the Heavens, and he references Euclides's inaccurate guess of the length of the circumference of the Earth. But he knew about the experimentation. I think most importantly, in the 3rd century, Aristarchus of Samos measures the circumference of the Earth using a solar eclipse. That's what you see on the right there. He also proposes a heliocentric model, which was not without pushback or controversy by some religious elite, but he's nonetheless, no record exists of him being like tried and put to death for encouraging heresy or any such thing. Eratosthenes, I believe we discussed in class, picture on the bottom right, picture 4, conducts an experiment to estimate the distance of the circumference of the Earth. He guesses 20,000 miles. It's closer to 24, but still quite impressive, again, using technology. There's another man, Hipparchus. His main contribution is, well, first of all, he possibly invented the astrolabe, which is an invention we'll get to on the next slide. And he emphasized having real, like, actual measurements, as opposed to just theories, as which you're seeing all these pictures on the slide, about how the planets move, but like actual measurements to measure the relative distance between them. The final document I'll discuss is Ptolemy of Alexandria, who learned from Hipparchus, Euclid, developed all these people, and he develops the Almagest, which is this sort of strange word that went to Greek and to Arabic and back to Greek. It's essentially a thick book with all sorts of measurements, all sorts of data, lasted well into for the next 1,000 years. It was relevant. It's basically a compilation of all of the data, guesses about predictions about planetary movement. One of the most important documents in Greek astronomy is essentially this. The main takeaway, though, is that they had a very poor sense of size and distance, but possibly due to the lack of telescopes, but they had a great understanding of movement and of theories of movement based on their uses of geometry and observation. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'd say one of the more interesting inventions doesn't exactly for astronomy, but you had to know a lot of it in order to make this, is this clock of Andronicus of Corraltes, It's 13.5, that's the top left, 13.5 meters high, featuring 8 sides for the winds, carved reliefs, water clock, sundials. It's a monument. It's sort of a monument which testifies to their knowledge of the cosmos, of astronomy, of time. Next two things are the armillary sphere, which is the one labeled 2, and then the actually, which is 3, which is not exactly a tool of observation. It's more a tool of teaching astronomy and also sort of guessing. So if you need, on any one of these, they're basically, number 2 is basically a 3D version of number 3, right? It's the sort of the same thing, and their purpose is to sort of, if you say like where's the Venus or Jupiter or Mars going to be now, you can sort of put in the date and like see where it's going to be and then like check sort of that. And then the last one is these two on the right, 4A and 4B, which is this crazy complicated clock mechanism, which also helps you calculate distance, calculate times. Nothing rivaled, honestly, its complexity until like the 14th century. I would say the last thing I will say is there's temples, which sort of align with the stars, but are also just an excellent tribute to their knowledge of architecture and astronomy, their knowledge of like architecture and geometry, and how that sort of aligns with their knowledge of the stars. And lastly, their tools, mostly by hand and mostly math and mostly just observation. There are pictures like this, pictures like I haven't marked pictures on the bottom left, which suggest telescopes, but again, and pictures of above that on the right, which sort of look like telescopes designed to picture, people like Eratosthenes or whatnot, but is unlikely simply because the time at which they would have been doing this, the technology for magnifying glasses wasn't that good. I'd say the lasting contributions, other than like specific documents and some tools, would be the names of planets, tools like geometry and vocabulary, right? They're the Greeks, like they inspired modern culture. We are, heirs of that tradition in general, and that includes astronomy. Jacob, you are muted.
Sorry about that. That was excellent, guys. I think we covered everything. Just quickly to run through, because I know we're a little over time. We picked up on 4 sort of overarching connections points. One was this idea of the origin myth of the universe not just being infinite. That for all of us, we had there was a story of how the universe and the earth came to be. Secondly, the alignment of architecture with the stars. In most of our presentations, we saw how there was architectural achievements, and they were often aligned or connected in some way to the stars and to cosmological events. There's also a big use of symmetry in all of our architecture, and that was sort of a reflection of symmetry and of higher ordered mathematical concepts that were used both in architecture and in astronomy, and how those tools of one were applied directly into the other, and there was sort of a cross communication across those two disciplines. And finally, just how much astronomy was used in daily life, and how it was not just a segmented group of the population that dealt in matters of the cosmos, but it found its way into everyday life, whether it be for tracking of time, or for celebration of festivals, or for learning when to harvest, or when to hunt, or when to go kill the guys next door. It was a tool of the people as much as it was a tool of the elect few. And so just like these older people, we should hope that going into the future, astronomy becomes once again a tool of the people, and that more people should do it. So anyways, I think we're way over time, so thank you very much for all being here, for listening to our presentation.
viewing.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.